Isn't it interesting that just as the fear of the pandemic comes to an end, we now have to fear a cyber attack pandemic? Governments will now pass quadrillions in legislation to fight this new enemy. Media has their new narrative, and congressional family members will suddenly be running, owning and invested in cybersecurity firms. This is a currency reset, economic collapse and bankruptcy. Their goal is a worldwide dictatorship of the banking cartel. Once all financial authority is removed from the individual governments, as the Federal Reserve is doing at this time with our own U.S. government, we will see the endgame of their well-planned and executed pandemic. The secret elite at the very top needs all authority shifted from the governments and into the hands of the international banking system, which they control. They will succeed in creating a one-world financial system with the international banks at the head, telling governments what to do instead of the other way around. But in order to have a one-world financial system, they need to introduce the world to their one-world currency. So they must completely bankrupt our government, as is already being done, and they need to put U.S. citizens in such a state of hopelessness, that we will all agree to this secret ruling elite's offer: accept our new world currency in place of your U.S. dollar, and we will bail you out. And we will accept it. Can't have a one-world economy, a one-world financial system, and a one-world government without a one-world currency now, can they? And whoever controls this world monetary system, do control this world. Thus, a worldwide dictatorship with this secret fraternity at the very top at the controls. And their weapon of choice for the overthrow of this world is the monetary system. It is my opinion that when the best rental property in the world, the US dollar, no longer offers a positive yield, it will collapse and be rejected as the world's reserve currency. No yield, and nobody wants our sorry-ass dollar. Most of us have never experienced anything like this in our entire lifetimes. Fear of the pandemic, ongoing civil unrest in major U.S. cities, and a whole host of other factors have combined to plunge us into the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression of the 1930s. If this is the recovery, what are things going to look like once economic conditions start to deteriorate again? More than half of all households in some of our largest cities are facing serious financial problems, and Americans continue to file for unemployment benefits at a rate that the United States had never seen before prior to 2020. When 695,000 workers filed for unemployment benefits during a single week in 1982, it established a record which stood for nearly 38 years. But now we have been way above that old record. Weekly jobless claims were worse than expected amid a plodding climb for the U.S. labor market from the damage inflicted by the pandemic. The Fed must lie about real inflation. If they admit that real inflation is over 10%, then it takes 10 years to inflate away half of your wealth. People who think they are going to retire are going to have a severe wake-up call. The real inflation of all the money created after 2008 is just now coming home to roost, and that isn't even counting all the offshore dollars from the petrodollar. As other countries use other currencies, those dollars will come home as well. Inflation in the next 20 years will be crushing. Learn to grow a garden. A big garden. And buy some silver and gold. Anything that will maintain its value. The storm is in the mail. If bread goes up in price, it is taken out of the family basket of weekly essentials, and replaced with something which has gone down, like out-of-season cruise ship prices. It is not only the stock exchanges that are manipulated. Unemployment figures are also a joke, not counting the tens of millions of Americans who have stopped looking for new jobs, and the tens of millions more who have to work multiple jobs to keep their heads barely above water. The United States has the worst wealth concentration in the developed world by far, and it is getting worse and worse. With that reality, that $2.9 trillion stimulus, which was a gift to corporations and the rich, was an abomination, which will come back to haunt the greedy wealthy. Let them eat cake always ends badly. When the politicians realized they could have more play money in the budget by leaning on the statisticians to understate CPI, that measure became worthless as a measure of inflation. These are the massive discrepancies in what the Fed is saying happens and what really happens with trillions of QE printed and dispersed. The little man standing behind the curtain in the final scenes of The Wizard of Oz is probably the most accurate presentation of what the Fed is doing. It's a scam, but the only difference is that you can't click your heels 3 times and go home. They're taking us all for the ride, and in that, we have no choice. I think about inflation as having to work harder, longer, and smarter to get less stuff than I used to get when I worked less and dumber. Based on that, I'd say there's been about 10% inflation compounded downward annually for quite a few years now. Inflation is directly proportional to the money that is produced out of thin air within a fractional reserve banking system. No other result is ultimately possible. Inflation is a slow robbery that does two things. It devalues savings and inflates asset prices, forcing people to spend and gamble. It stimulates consumption. On a planet where everything is finite, inflation completely warps supply and demand and, over time, leads to shortages of essentials and overproduction of garbage. Inflation exists as one of many wealth transfer mechanisms. It's a casino where some do win, but only at the expense of someone else losing. And of course, the parasite institutions get to collect a convenience fee for doing God's work. Supposedly taxes are collected for the privilege of us using the Fed's money. Yet somehow even transactions not involving fiat are taxed equally. Even if you barter, you're supposed to pay taxes issued in the currency that was nowhere near during the exchange. I mean, come on. We all know that the foundation of the modern economy rests on lies upon lies. Instead of maintaining equilibrium, inflation favors growth. When growth stops, everything collapses. Money vanishes, and only assets remain. All the collateral pledged goes back to the bank when they yank the carpet. That's what it's all about. The game auto terminates when the bank owns everything there is, and in over 100 years of Fed's existence, we're almost there. It's by design. The dollar is backed by paper and ink. It is being overvalued from the beginning. The market will correct it. Eventually, when the dollar reaches the true value of the paper and ink it is made of, then the dollar will become stable until the paper and ink wars start. The US dollar bought 100 cents worth of stuff in 1913. Today, the US dollar buys between 3 and 4 cents worth. The majority of sheep in America have no idea of the truth. That is, today the US dollar is just a piece of paper with ink on it. It is a con game run by the bankers. The con stands for confidence. When that is gone, it will be Germany in 1922 here in America. The Fed is not creating money. It is creating the currency, i.e., debt and debt, which is slavery. Nobody can create money, i.e., gold, there's a finite amount, and when it's gone, it's gone. When the US dollar and all other currencies collapse, gold's true value will be revealed, and at that price, it'll be unaffordable for 99.99% of the world's population. The response to the 2008 crisis was not a public works campaign like in 1932, which injected money into the broader economy by putting people to work and paying wages. Instead of the asset purchases, interest rate suppression, bailouts, and regulatory largesse strictly benefited corporations and the banking sector. The money is essentially firewalled off in a small part of the economy, benefiting only the so-called 1%. As a result, M2 velocity is at a historic low. There are no channels for it to flow to the general economy to benefit the populace. Neither does it circulate in the economy, so a portion can be taxed and used by the public sector to provide service and repair infrastructure. This has been going on literally since Fed creation in 1913, shifted into high gear when Nixon closed the gold window in 1971 and is now balls to the wall to fend off QE side effects like recession, deflation, and to discount federal debt. Obviously, if the public had any real notion of why this was happening and what it was really doing to them, there would be tires burning in every intersection. The great inflation must be done on the QT, hence, PSYOP low CPI. Imagine a world where the dollar remained pegged to gold. Since Nixon left the gold standard, the dollar has lost 3/4 of its purchasing power. The peg would probably have been moved a few times, but even if the dollar had been devalued by 500%, it would still have 8 or 9 times the purchasing power it has today. The process of inflation strips the dollar of the value it had when we earned it, and transfers these gains to the first users of the new dollars. Spoiler alert. That group is a big club, and we ain't in it. Every day, everything the 99% of folks use has gone through the roof in the past 20 years. Couple the price hikes with reduced quantities per unit hides, or so the idiots in power think it does, from the uninformed consumer. Thank goodness that they have not been shrinking package sizes to try and hide it from the consumer. Feeling inflation depends on your income bracket and class. If you are a billionaire, corporate director, a rich banker or hedge fund manager fitting the 1% rich class that have more assets than the lower 90% of the population, of course for those inflation is never a felt problem while living under subsidized QE helicopter money and artificial asset bubbles. Not to mention if one is a Harvard economics professor that writes the inflation algorithms to report inflation. But, if you fit the lower 90% class, inflation is there and it is felt through food price, rent, gas, real estate, medical, stamps, etc. Plus not to mention the never-ending stationary service growing monthly fees that persist the system. Taxes and insurance burden. We are the frog slowly being boiled alive. People on fixed incomes have been eviscerated over the past 30 years. It breaks my heart to see old people suffering while the piggish public servants and other protected groups live the high life. Also, you may notice that .gov has stopped boasting about public service compensations. Yeah, well, if you get a chance to look at some compensation packages of our dearly beloved public servants, you will see that they are making way more than the private sector equivalents. We have a government that we can no longer afford, and they are lying through their teeth to us. The CPI is estimated by government employees. Do you expect accuracy? Between vacation and lunch breaks, there is no time in their busy schedules actually to work. I don't know about the rest of you, but it's getting mighty hot in my neck of the woods. It is a rigged system. Rob Peter to pay Paul. Seriously, when this economy crashes, there's going to be some serious bullseyes on folks' back that have been lying to the people for so long.